We will start the presentation and talk a little bit about ourselves in the first slide. The title is Let the Boxers Tell Their Stories, History of Video Games in the GDR. We will first talk a little bit about our research group, then about the objects that we looked at and the method we used, talk a little bit about the games, and then hopefully, if there's time, we can, that's basically it, right? Yeah, that's it. So let's start. Our goal is to explore the history of video games and gamers in the GDR, so German Democratic Republic, by unboxing the technical devices we call black boxes, which means we focus on not the software, not only the software, but also the hardware, which means, in this case, a console and an arcade machine. We are an interdisciplinary independent research group, which means we're not part of the university. We all have different jobs in our real life, so we come to that later. We try to explore, we try to take the objects, look at them, look at the games, and kind of research their history and try to find new ways of telling their stories, because we all from different backgrounds, what you can see here. Karla Hoess, that's me. I'm a game producer in real life. I'm a media historian in my past. We have Jens, who is do you want to say anything?
I am an archivist.
So he's an archivist. We have Emily, who is a moving image artist, and Tim, who's an historian and a journalist. So we have different perspectives on things, which you can find in our projects as well. Our research objects are two things so far. We plan to do even more. The one on the left is the BSS-01, that's the Bildschirmspiel 01, which is a console produced in the GDR. And the Polyplay on the right, which is the only the only arcade machine produced in the GDR. In the future, we hope to do something similar to your project, look at the homebrew scene and home computers. There was a big scene with the local, with the GDR computer KC85, and then C64, and I guess even more.
The Sinclair computers were also quite popular in the former GDR. Basically, games were written for every computer available, even for computers which were usually used in the people-owned companies. But as Karla said, we didn't have the time to take a look at the scene yet.
Yeah, so we're trying to expand our knowledge even further. So for the background, we have, which is important, to know, it's different than when you talk about homebrew scene. Those two games that we just looked at were products made or produced by the state, or let's say it was a mission, it was a commissioned project, both of the games, so it was an official games. And therefore you have to kind of know some of the historical milestones. The first one is probably the most important one. It's the unity, it's translated, so it probably loses some of its nice socialist touch. So it's the unity of economic and social policy, which basically means that the government wanted to satisfy the material needs of the consumer in terms to achieve a more productive and efficient society. Let's say, how do you put it very nicely before?
To sum it up, a happy socialist is a productive socialist.
So they had to be supplied with things they need, like consumer goods, media and everything. So the plan was to provide the people with those things so they don't have to import them illegally, which happened as well. But yeah. So in the late 70s, you have a hyperization of the GDR microelectronics industry, which even went further in the 1980s. So they wanted to reach the top of the world production of microelectronics. And they saw video games as one means to make this goal, like to actually use computer games to kind of engage people in computing and into programming, and then, you know, advance in the world industry. So a little bit about our work, because it's kind of interesting. I think maybe we can talk about this later in the panel as well. I don't know who of you works in the same field. We do, of course, the archival researches. We do to City Archives and Museum, the Computerspiele Museum in Berlin. Who hasn't visited, go there, it's a nice place. We went to the BSTU archive, which is like from the Ministry of State Security, the archives, because of course the security knew everything that was happening. And of course private collections. We visited former production sites in Frankfurt-Oder, which is next to the Polish border. We went also to Chemnitz, which is the other city that the games were produced at. We interviewed witnesses. Jaro, you mentioned the same, that you talk to people. It's important. It's an essential part of this part of history, because you don't find a lot written down. So you need to talk to the people. Of course, it's not an objective. Well, it's an opinion. An objective opinion doesn't exist. So you kind of take the input and then you kind of have to sort it, how to use it. We talked to experts, private collectors who know a lot of things. And we looked at, which is very interesting, we looked at and analyzed and used original texts and sounds in our work. Our product so far includes little film clips, text, pictures, and now an exhibition in the ZKM in Karlsruhe, if you're ever there. Yeah, and so how do we work? We kind of take the box, let's say the game console, we open the box, right? We look inside, what is included? What do you see? We explore the elements inside, which of course, like you see the plan, you know, you see here an open controller, you see the chip built in on the right, on the top of the right. You collect all possible information about the single element, sort them into categories. So that's what so far we did. I don't know if that's the perfect way to do, but we're trying to find out. We defined 3 categories, which is technical factors, social factors, and discourse, basically. So we have technical factors as like, you know, all the plans, all the technical data. We have social factors, the locations, the people involved, the politics. And we have like the collection of all the sources, which is the last one. Then we kind of have the categories, and then we try to find connections again between the single sources, or try new connections, so we can establish a network, a new perspective on things. Because, as I mentioned before, it's really hard to find, there's no story written so far, so kind of take all the input you can get, and then try to find your way around it. So that's how we did it. By the way, I forgot something. The first try of doing this, you can find in those books, you can have a look later, where you can find the whole project concerning the game console. So if you want to have a look, it's here. That's the console, BSS 01. It's a Pong clone. You know, the GDR obviously needed also their own Pong because they couldn't import it. It was too expensive. So they used the same chip. Yeah? So they bought the chip for a lot of money. It was produced between 1979 and 1981 in Frankfurt-Oder. VEB means people-owned. I don't know if you know the term. It's a people-owned company. That's what Jens also mentioned. It had 4 games, of course, the classic tennis, squash, and so on. Price, it was 550 marks, which was very expensive at the time. And therefore, it was also a flop, like you said. It didn't really work out. The production was cancelled due to the production of a radio alarm clock, which was the new, you know, the hot thing to do in the 80s. And, oh no, okay. Now, And the remaining copies were shipped to other countries. And they were also shipped to Western countries, which surprised me because it was never written anywhere. But they tried to get rid of everything. When they found out in 1981 that the game was basically out, it was not a big success anymore. So we go to the next one that we want to talk about, which has an interesting story, and that's your turn. Okay,
let's talk about the polyplay. And as I saw, I've got to do this quick. So I'm going to stick to my notice. The polyplay is somewhat special because it was the only arcade machine produced and developed in the former GDR. About a dozen games were available for the system, including a Pac-Man clone and the hunting game, and 8 to 10 games could be installed a single cabinet. The polyplay was sold for about 22,000 GDR marks, but this price did not include the games. A full machine cost about 30,000 GDR marks, which was a lot. It cost more than a car at the time. About 2,000 machines were built between 1985 and 1989, and there are at least 21 cabinets remaining today. An interesting fact is that the East German Ministry of State Security, the MFS or Stasi, was involved in the development. The involvement of the MFS was part of the operative procedure Kartell, which began in 1983 within Department 18 of the MFS District Administration Karl-Marx-Stadt. Kartell served as an operative framework meant to support the local industry by promoting the development of prototypes and solutions while maintaining secrecy. Kartell employed a relatively small number of dedicated personnel, including official secret police staff and so-called IM. Inoffizielle Mitarbeiter, which could be translated as informants or unofficial collaborators. They also temporarily hired personnel for specific projects and maintained secret development workshops. The history of the GDR's only arcade machine began with a report of the MFS received at the end of 1983. An informant reported that a people-owned company discussed the possibility of producing Spielautomaten, which could be translated as arcade or slot machines, but hadn't come up with a solution yet. So the MFS assigned an informant to gather further information. In early 1984, said informant approached a member of the Economic Council as well as another people-owned company, the VEB Polytechnic in Karl-Marx-Stadt, to discuss the issue and evaluate the interest. And by mid-1984, it was clear that the Polytechnic was interested in and capable of mass-producing the machines. However, they couldn't spare any experts to develop the machine they should produce. So the aforementioned informant hired 4 employees from yet another people-owned company, the VEB Buchungsmaschinenwerk Karl-Marx-Stadt, via a service contract for the actual development. You see, it gets ridiculous at this point. The prototype then was developed within 4 months. The electronics mainly consisted of standardized computer components, and a single-class ZX81 served as inspiration for the developers. This also proved they had access to an Atari 2600 and 6 games. Well, in 1985, the official serial production of the polyplay by the VEB Polytechnic began. And this production was rather normal by GDR standards. There even was a youth brigade, the Jugendbrigade Spielcomputer, which constructed those things. Nevertheless, Kartell's development team delivered the microelectronic components for the first 50 machines, and the Stasi continued to monitor the production.
The interesting thing is also, if you look at the reception of the history before Jens did all the research in the archives, was that the machine was actually built by a youth group. Like it was like an independent production, which is not true. So yeah. If you look, I don't know if the Wikipedia article has been corrected.
It hasn't been corrected yet.
Yeah, so this is a machine in action. You can see on the monitor, you can see one of the games, which is a Pong, like a Pong version.
Pac-Man.
Yeah, Pac-Man, sorry. Yeah, and here you see...
As I said, there are still some machines in existence, and those pictures are taken from a restoration project by the Rechenwerkhalle Computer Museum. And the pictures were provided by the website robotontechnik.de. As you see, before, after, they did quite an excellent job restoring the machine to its former glory.
So just to sum it up, what can machines tell us about? Here you see the list. Of course, the most important is history of video games. Maybe we can talk later about what we can learn about society and about people involved in it. Thank you. Sorry for...